Welcome to the Etsy Conversations podcast, featuring inspiring interviews with Etsy shop owners, hosted by Ijama Elazu.
Hi, and welcome to the Etsy Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Ijama, and I thank you for joining me for another episode. And I am so excited about this week's guest because for everyone who has emailed or messaged me somehow asking to do an episode that focuses on vintage sellers, this is for you. My guest this week is Traci Hugelmaier, and she runs the Etsy shop Rustic Eye, which she's run since 2013. She also runs a website called Vintagepreneur University, where she teaches and helps vintage sellers specifically to start, grow, and scale their businesses on Etsy. And so I'm really thrilled to get into this conversation. Traci, thank you so much for being my guest, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. And like I said, I know Etsy shines a really bright spotlight on handmade sellers, but we have vintage sellers and supply sellers too. And sometimes the other two groups feel a little bit left out. So I'm so glad that we get to talk all about vintage and how to help vintage sellers. But before we get into all that, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am now a completely stay-at-home mom, I guess you would say. I haven't always been. I came from kind of the corporate world, but it was always kind of a goal of mine to be able to be home with my family and have more flexibility and not have that mom guilt that, we all have, but more so when you're working full time. Yeah. And so I live at home with my family and run my Etsy shop, and also, as you mentioned, my business VintagepreneurUniversity.com.
And how long have you been operating Vintagepreneur University?
It's been about a year that I've had the site up, nice. Maybe a little bit less. So it's kind of been an idea for mine for a long time because I saw the need in my own researching and seek of learning more information. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of been an idea of mine but the site itself has been up for about a year.
Yes. And behind the year's worth of work you've done for Vintagepreneur University goes, about 6 years now, because you've been selling on Etsy since 2013. So 6 years of actually doing what you're now teaching. So can we start with your journey on Etsy? How did you first find Etsy and decide to start selling on there?
Well, I first started kind of upcycling things. So I kind of started as a handmade seller myself. Okay. I really loved decorating my own home, and I kind of started to, I don't even remember where I first learned about Etsy, mm-hmm. but I just had the idea hey, I made this cool thing. Maybe somebody else will like it. So I found Etsy and I put it up on the site, and, I got my first sale. And the things that I was upcycling were things that, I was finding in thrift shops and stuff. So I've always been drawn to vintage as well. And I naturally was around a lot of vintage in my thrift shopping. So I started listing vintage as well. And I think that it was just a normal progression for me to really, when I started looking at it more as a business, mm-hmm. Vintage was a way to scale my business more so than hand making my upcycled items. So that's kind of how it went for me in my journey.
That's so interesting that you say that, because I don't think many people might view vintage as a way to scale, because with vintage, it seems like there is a finite supply, if you will. The nature of vintage being what it is. So that's so interesting that that's the path that you took. Now, while you were first on Etsy, you were still working, and then eventually recently, well, within the last couple of years, you've left your corporate job. How did you know that it was time to leave that and focus full time on your business ventures?
That's such a good question. I think from really early on, because I've always kind of had an entrepreneurial bug in me from the time that I was really little. So early on, I started to, when I, first started selling on Etsy, I kind of got the idea that, hey, if I can sell more and more and more and make more and more money, just maybe I can turn this into a full-time business. It's one of those things that developed over time. But so I kept kind of pushing towards that, growing my business goal with the idea that idea kind of in my head. And then when I started finally seeing that, okay, I can make a steady income here doing this, because at the time I was just doing it on the weekends, as I don't want to say as a hobby, because it really was, I was trying to make a business out of it. Yeah. At least within a couple years after doing it. Yeah. And once I started seeing that I was getting steady sales, even though it wasn't a lot. I mean, at that point, it was like one sale a week. But I thought to myself, well, if I can get a sale a week doing this part-time and putting really just a small amount of work into it, then what can I do, if I can do it full-time? So that was kind of my thought process. And so then the goal became, how do I convince my husband that I can quit my entire corporate job and do it full time? So I worked on him for, a couple more years. And eventually I got to a point where I could, I felt comfortable saying, hey, I know that if I can do this full time, I can make a full-time income. Yeah. And of course we took a risk, a huge risk, but I was lucky enough to have his support, and we just kind of went for it.
That had to have taken a lot of faith in yourself and vision for the future, because I know a lot of sellers who might feel like, if I'm only making a sale a week, there's no way this is ever going to be something sustainable. That I could walk away from the security of a job and all the benefits that come with that walk away from all that. So that's impressive that you saw the vision and you've been able to bring it into, you've been able to bring it to pass, or, into reality. I don't know if that makes sense, what I'm saying.
Thank you. Yeah. And by the time I actually quit my job, I was making more than a sale a week, but still it was kind of, a scale type of situation where, okay, more time, I can make more money. And I knew that I wasn't going to be making my corporate income the moment I quit my job. I mean, that was just completely unrealistic. But, my goal has been to increase my profits year over year, which is what I've done. And I've been happy with that.
Great. So I like that you mentioned that you knew that you weren't going to immediately be replacing your corporate income. Do you feel that now that your ability to earn an income is fully in your hands, that you're more able to either replace that income or maybe even exceed it because you have more control over how you create your own income?
Yes, absolutely. It's kind of like the ceiling's the limit feeling. Mm. I know that when I worked, in the corporate world, it's obviously a completely different world, and you can only go. You're so limited to where you can go. Yeah. And when you have your own business, it's really all about, what you want out of it and what you're going to put into it, and believing in yourself and kind of just going for it. Because, you're really your biggest roadblock when it comes to, making your business bigger and better.
Now, I know that you had the vision that you could make it work. Did you have any reservations at all then, and even now? Maybe not reservations, but are there times that you worry about certain things, and how do you get past those hesitations that might sometimes come along?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely have been moments where I've doubted, oh no, what if I can't make this work? I mean, I think that's human nature.
Yes.
I think it's just a matter of pushing through it. And also, I try and look back at what I have accomplished and how, like, if I'm having a slow week or something, I'll look back at my statistics from, a long period of time and remind myself, okay, you are increasing, year after year, month after month, like you're going in the right direction. And so a slow week right now, the normal ebbs and flows, that's okay, and I try and push through that way. And also my just knowing, keeping a hold of my vision and my goals and why I'm doing it, because there are other things besides, just having the income, that with not being in a corporate job, I'm able to be there for my family. Yes. Just things like, there's been some health issues that my daughter has had, and I can take her to her appointments whenever I need to. Yeah. It's just things like that you just can't replace with income.
Yes, I agree. What would you say has been the most significant factor that has contributed to the success that you found on Etsy?
Most significant factor. I think it's been just my openness to learning and trying new things. So sometimes I try things that don't work, and I know that's just the nature of trying new things. So I put myself out there and my new ideas out there, and knowing that not all of them are going to work. I've had plenty of things that I've tried that haven't worked. So just always trying to learn and grow, I think, has contributed most.
Yeah. You and me both. If I tell you how many things I've tried because I thought for sure this is the best thing.
Yeah.
And then it just was far from the best thing.
Yes,
so
exactly.
I think that's a good attitude to have, and a great ingredient in being successful is just being willing to learn, and even more willing to make mistakes and then learn from them and then move on.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, speaking about learning, you have an article that you contributed to eRank, which, for anyone who doesn't know, eRank used to be known as Etsy Rank. It's a keyword research tool and so much more, really, specifically for Etsy sellers. It's owned by Anthony Wolf, who I had on the podcast. Oh, I don't remember the episode, but some time ago. And Traci wrote an article for their blog called The Top 5 Biggest Customer Service Mistakes Etsy Sellers Make. Can we talk a little bit about that? And why do you think customer service mistakes are so impactful for Etsy sellers?
Yeah, customer service is such a passionate thing of mine when it comes to running an Etsy shop. So I put it into the context of mistakes, but as you can see in the article, it's really about what can you do to be, have better customer service and really make your shop shine in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and you gave us in the article, and I will link to this article in the notes for this episode, so anyone can go and check it out. You can also go to the eRank website and check it out on their blog, which the link will send you to. So you gave us 5 in particular, and it's a really good read. So I want folks to actually read it. But of the 5, what would you say is one that is easily, that perhaps us as sellers very easily make, but could just as easily fix and not keep shooting ourselves in the foot by repeatedly making that same mistake?
Yeah, well, one of my favorites is accepting returns. So
Yeah.
I know there are a lot, and I mean there are a lot of my favorites, to be honest, but that's just the one that came to mind.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of Etsy sellers, and particularly vintage Etsy sellers, are afraid of accepting returns, and because it's such a fear that, oh my gosh, it's just me, I'm just one person, and it would be a nightmare for me to try and accept returns, and so, and it would be costly and all these things. And I totally get that. Those are perfectly normal fears. But I think if you can just kind of get over that fear a little bit and accept returns, it's actually works in your favor. And because when you do accept returns in your shop, it takes away that really the risk from the customer who is searching around your shop to purchase the item. It's kind of a psychological thing. If they know they can return it, then they're much more likely to purchase it, even though the chances of them returning it are super, super small. Yeah. And especially if you have, excellent customer service from start to finish, and you really wow your customer, and you have strategies in place that are, double checking things like double checking to make sure you're sending you don't send the wrong thing to the wrong person, you package it really well and all of these things, and you're answering all your customers' questions in the item description and have great photos, then the chances of having that return are so, so small, even on vintage. I honestly, in my 6 years of selling on Etsy, I've maybe had a handful of returns, and that is worth the risk 100% of just kind of getting over it and doing it.
Yeah, I agree. And as a customer, I know I always feel a little bit pensive if I don't have an out when I'm trying to buy something. Even if it's something I want, I still like to know that if on the off chance there's something about it that doesn't work out, I'm not stuck with it, and I have I have a way to to send it back or to make things right. And more often than not, I assume, like me, most people don't actually end up going that far as to return it. Like you said, I think it's a mental thing, just knowing that if I had to, I can.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's great. Yes, thank you. And one of the things you recommend is that as sellers, we should accept returns, exchanges, and cancellations, accept all three. And basically that just puts our customers' minds at ease.
Exactly. I know I see a lot, and I think it's even actually kind of like the default template when you accept your policies that you will accept returns and cancellations, but not exchanges. And so I see that a lot. And I recently questioned someone that I was coaching, hey, I'm just curious why are you doing that? And she's the one who's like, well, I just, I don't really have anything to offer them for an exchange. And I kind of just told her, well, I get that, but if you can accept exchanges too, just put that in your policies. You're never going to get an exchange, but you're just going one more step. You're probably never going to get an exchange, right? But you're just going that one more step to put that customer's mind at ease.
Yeah. Yeah. I never thought about that, but yes, with vintage, sometimes you don't have something else to exchange it with. Not exactly. I remember I had an incident once where somebody bought something and then decided they didn't want it because she was buying it for her daughter, and then her daughter didn't like the colors, and so she wanted to cancel the sale. And long story short, I ended up canceling it. I had no problems canceling it because she was nice, and I didn't mind. You just want them to be happy. And I want to say she was still able to leave me a review. This was a number of years ago. And in her review, she said that she canceled the sale, but she was happy because it just went smoothly. There wasn't any problem with the cancellation, and she initiated it, which I thought was nice because I didn't even need to get a review for that sale because it really ended up not being. But I don't know if that's still possible on Etsy, but you never know, how that could still also help your reviews, even, through something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things that you do is you teach vintage sellers on Etsy. Why and when did you decide to start Vintagepreneur University and teach other sellers, vintage sellers specifically?
Yeah, so like I said, it happened about a year ago, and it was really in the heart of my own learning and kind of seeing a couple things. One, the gap of learning available out there for vintage sellers. Mm-hmm. And then also just some of the things that I was doing myself that were really working, and I saw the negativity out there in the communities, and I kind of wanted to jump out there and say, but hey, stop being so negative, and there's things you can do to really, help and work and kind of own your own success and make the Etsy platform work for you. And so it just kind of, I felt really passionate about that and wanting to help other people do the same.
And I'm so grateful to have people like you who rise above all the negativity and want to help the community. And that's one of the reasons I'm so glad to have you on the podcast this week. One of the things that you offer is a free training. How can folks get access to that, and what's a high level overview of what they will be getting in that free training?
Yeah, on my website, vintagepreneuruniversity.com/free training is the best place to get that training. And what it is just 5 days of emails that come to your inbox, and it covers everything from, if you're a brand new shop, it goes over exactly so if you don't even have an Etsy shop yet, it'll tell you exactly how to set up an Etsy shop in the right way. And if you have a shop already, it kind of covers the things that you can go back and see if you can optimize it in a better way than you have it already. So kind of that, check for you if you already do have your shop at a very basic level. And then it covers things like branding and, of course, customer service and all the things from a high level perspective to really set yourself up for success. It's kind of the ground level things that you can do.
Okay. And it's specifically for vintage sellers or people who want to sell vintage on Etsy?
It is. It's designed specifically for vintage sellers. Obviously, a lot of the concepts are the same, across the board, but it concentrates on helping vintage sellers specifically and kind of the nuances that we face as vintage sellers.
Okay. All right. Great. I like that. You also have an SEO challenge, and that's separate from the training, right?
It is. It's so usually the SEO challenge is really good for any vintage seller that already has a shop open and they're to the point where they're ready to work on their search engine optimization. So it's similar to the other training that I offer, in that it comes to your email, and 5 days of emails that give specific kind of lessons on what you can do to optimize your shop, both for Etsy and then also outside of Etsy. So like your Google optimization.
Oh, that's great. And for anyone who wants to know, the name of that challenge, and it's also free, by the way, is I Hate Cha-Chings, said no Etsy vintage seller ever SEO challenge. Like that. And I will link to that. And folks can get access to that through Vintagepreneur University as well. If you're listening and you just want to hop over there really quickly, it's vintagepreneuruniversity.com/free challenge. And the training is vintagepreneuruniversity.com/free training. Are those both correct, Traci?
Yep, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. And then you have a community as well. So if folks want to connect with you, and we'll go over this again before we finish our conversation, but you also have a Facebook group for vintage sellers specifically. And on Facebook, it's Etsy Junkies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of where we hang out in the little space of Facebook. And that's also a space where we try to keep negativity away so that we can really focus on doing the things that will help build our own businesses and our own success in our business.
Yes. Now, Traci, have you tried to join Etsy teams? And if so, are there any that you've found beneficial for other vintage sellers?
I actually have never really, in the beginning, I think I did kind of dabble in the teams, but it's been a really long time since I've done anything with the team. So I don't really have anything, to recommend there, but I'm sure there are some good ones.
Okay. Now, talking about vintage sellers, and you mentioned SEO, and not just as it pertains to Etsy, but off of Etsy as well. Do you recommend in the mentoring and the teaching that you do to vintage sellers, do you recommend that they have an independent online presence, basically a website, either for blogging or for e-commerce? And if so, can you give us some tips about what you think is a good way to go about that for a vintage seller?
Sure. So, it definitely doesn't hurt to have an outside presence. There are a lot of benefits of doing so. For vintage sellers, I think it would be very difficult to have an e-commerce site in addition to your Etsy shop because you have so much one of a kind. Mm-hmm. But what I do and what I recommend is to have a website where you at least have a blog, because you want to try and, have a connection with your community that you build. And you can do that through building your own email list and having a blog and providing content. And so I think, and there are other benefits of having a blog, like as it relates to search engine optimization. If you have outside links, for example, from your blog or your website to your Etsy shop, that helps tell Google that, there's something there that they should look at. So that is only a positive thing for your Etsy shop. And also, even if you don't have your own blog or website, if you can get your Etsy shop, if you can get links to your Etsy shop on somebody else's blog or website or anywhere out there on the web, that also helps your search engine optimization with Google and other outside search engines.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. One of the things that I found when I, considered setting up a blog specifically for my Etsy shop, because I sell primarily crafting supplies and vintage crafting supplies at that, is as opposed to a handmade seller that has a specific craft and they can talk about it, or someone who sells vintage but specializes in a very specific line of products. I feel like, okay, what do I even have to offer in a blog? Because my supplies are kind of all over the place. And so for someone like me, I just feel like, okay, I don't even know what I would begin to say. And so I stall on that. And I don't know why I started that story. So I'm going to.
I totally get that. It's really hard. It was really hard for me to come up with content, but with Rustic Eye, with my shop, so my recommendation there is what I finally learned was when you can kind of wrap your brain around and start to understand who your target market is and your niche, and you can start to really understand what their what they like and what they need and things that interest them and who they are, then you can start to provide content that will appeal to them. So maybe, like, for example, for your supplies, you would perhaps blog about things that people would make with your supplies and give them suggestions for things they can make with their supplies. So that's just one example, an idea.
Okay. And you go into all this in your free training.
I do go into a lot of it in my free training, and my free training doesn't end there. So once you get my free training, I send out emails every week and continue to give tips and advice. So eventually I touch on everything.
Yeah. Okay, good. When it comes to having an outside presence, do you have a preference for platforms? I know most of the main options that we have are Blogger or WordPress or Squarespace. I think, Wix and Weeb. Actually, there are quite a few. Do you have a preference?
My preference is WordPress.org because you have complete ownership and control over it. So it's even for, sometimes a lot of the other platforms are a little bit more user friendly to get started. And so I know they attract a lot of people that way, but it kind of depends on what your goals are. If your goals are to grow and build on a website and be able to maybe at some point have an e-commerce or other things that you offer on your website, then WordPress.org is a really great platform, and it's really inexpensive to, you can get started with web hosting for, $3 or $4 a month sometimes. So, but you have to have those basic. And there are lots of trainings out there. I mean, you could YouTube something or whatnot to open a WordPress site, but that's my recommendation because you do have full ownership and full flexibility on what you can make it in the future.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that. Can we talk about shop promotion and social media and what that looks like for you with Rustic Eye and what you found that works well for you when it comes to promoting your Etsy shop and getting the word out there?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, like probably most people, I struggle a lot with where to spend my time and what actually works and is worth my time. Because there are so many things out there. And if you spread yourself too thin, sometimes you end up not being as effective in the things that you're trying to do. So, I have everything. I have, I have Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest. I have all those things, but usually I'll put my focus on one at a time when it comes to social media. The things that I do that I think work for me better than anything else, even more than social media, are using promoted listings on Etsy and in a strategic way, and then also having my email list, because when you have your email list, that's your community. When you send out that email, they're going to get it, even if it doesn't end up in spam or whatever. But, you just have that closer connection. And no matter where they go or where you go, you always have them on the other side of that email. So those are the two biggest things that I think work the best for me.
Okay. Oh, and I'm so glad you brought that up. Did you figure out promoted listings through trial and error, or were there any resources that you were able to reference that taught you how to make the most of promoted listings? Because I know people struggle with that. I wouldn't say I struggled with it. I just didn't know what I was doing when I tried promoted listings.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think definitely trial and error is how I eventually learned. I kind of looked at what was out there and what people were saying they were doing. And of course, you have to be very careful about taking advice from just anyone on a forum or a group or whatever, because people are always well-meaning, but sometimes the best advice isn't always out there and can lead you down a wrong path. But I mean, I think what I'm getting at is essentially it was just trial and error and learning what worked best for me and kind of tweaking it until I got it in a place that, was working well.
Okay. What do you think a good amount of time is to give promoted listings a chance before, if ever, giving up and deciding it's not working for you?
Well, I think it probably depends on your particular situation and your budget. I know I started with a really low budget of $1 and I still have not increased that to over $3 a day. I think I have a possibility of going up to like, I don't know, $20 a day or something, but that just sounds scary to me. I think that's not really your question. I mean, I think that it just really depends, because I want to say you have to give it a good amount of time to see results. But on the other hand, I tried Google listings and promoted listings through Etsy, and I didn't feel like it worked for me. I ended up turning it off and not using it.
Okay.
So, I mean, you have to make that personal decision for your own shop and your own situation. But I do think that it can be a very successful tool for vintage sellers if used correctly.
Okay. And that makes sense, because especially with vintage, because we're so different, everyone's products are different, so it's hard to say, to set any hard and fast rules around it. So it just does make sense that one has to just figure out what works and not be willing to jump ship too quickly, which I think I was guilty of, because I was like, I don't know where this money is going. I don't know what I'm doing. I do like the keyword information that it would give me. Yes. I loved that, because I could use that. And so if for nothing else, I would go back and I would start again and use that intel and then just give it more time.
And start, at a very low budget so that you're not really taking a huge risk, I think, too. Give it a try.
Now, you also mentioned mailing lists, which, like you said, and I've heard from so many other people, not just on Etsy, but off Etsy as well, is the importance of having a mailing list, of having, a list of people who have said, I want to hear from you, stay in touch with me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have so many questions about this. First of all, what service do you use, and are you happy with it? Did you find it was easy to learn and to use to stay connected with your audience?
I use ConvertKit now.
Okay.
But I didn't start on ConvertKit. I started on MailChimp, and that is definitely what I recommend for any beginner, because number one, it's completely free for quite a while until you have quite a few subscribers. I think it's like 1,000 subscribers.
Okay.
And also it has a really easy interface to work with. It's just a lot more straightforward. ConvertKit had more of the features that I was looking for and flexibility once I became a little bit more advanced at it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely tricky, and I'm still learning the platform. But I like the platform.
Okay. And how often do you stay in touch with the people on your list, and what do you say to them?
That's another really good question. So I actually have my two different lists because I have my Etsy customers, my Etsy shop customers, Rustic Eye, which I call my VIPs. And then I have my Vintagepreneur University coaching side of everything, and anyone who has opted in to get my free trainings and those types of things. And so with my Rustic Eye side, I more recently have been more consistent, because the key is consistency really when it comes to your email list, because you want to keep them engaged and, let them know that you're still there and that you have things to offer them. Mm-hmm. So now what I do is try and email them every other week. Okay. And with my and what do I email them? It can be anything from here's my new blog post, here's some tips for things that I know that they would like. It could be letting them know about new products or things, promotions that I'm having, so sales that come up. And recently I've been really trying to concentrate on perks for my VIP. So I've been kind of getting them really excited about things that I'm offering only to them as VIPs. Mm. So that's some ideas for what you can do for your Etsy shop. And then with my other side, I email them once a week.
Okay. And that's the Vintagepreneur University audience.
Yes, my junkies, the Etsy junkies.
Oh. Okay. Yeah. Every time we talk about mailing lists, I always feel so guilty because my mailing list is not just cold, it's like frozen. And every time somebody signs up, I feel so guilty. I'm like, oh, I don't know what to say to you, but thank you for wanting to be on the list.
Yeah, you know what? I totally get that because I've been there. It's a really, I think, common thing to feel. And I mean, there are a couple things that you can do there. One is you can have some emails that they'll get consistently when they first sign up. So at least it's kind of like a welcome email series is what it's called. And it just lets them know, It welcomes them. And then it tells them a little bit about you and your story. And then, it tells them what they can expect from you. And it's just your opportunity to really kind of introduce yourself to them and your community and kind of get them excited about being, in your community. And then for the other thing is, if you have a cold list like you do, like you just explained, it's never too late to warm them up again. Just be like, hey, I'm here, I'm back. And then just move forward,
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that. I don't know why. I just feel like, I can't say anything. It's been so long. They'll be like, who? What? How did you get my email? Trust me, you gave it to me.
And you might have some people that decide to get off your email list at that point, but that's okay, because those are people that, you want people on your list that want to be there. So don't be afraid of that.
Okay. Thank you, Traci. Now, for other sellers, what would you say in the 6 years you've been selling on Etsy is actually, no, I'm not going to ask that because I think we've covered that really well. What's something that you're doing now that's working really well for you that you think perhaps other people can do as well that might work for them too?
Yeah, that's a really hard question for me because there's so many things I want to say, but I'm going to narrow it down to one, and that is recently I have started offering free gift wrapping to my my customers, and it's kind of goes in line with my recent, like, what more can I offer to my customers, not just my VIPs, but my customers. And it's so much fun just doing, for me, I was already kind of gift wrapping my packages anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just kind of making that a thing, like, hey, this is free gift wrapping, always available. And people love it, because it's kind of like an experience on the other end that they get. And it's part of that, giving them that whole experience from start to finish. And that goes into having that just excellent customer service and that wow factor. And so anything, even if it's not gift wrapping your packages, just anything you can do to really kind of go above and beyond and give them, give your customers that wow experience.
Okay. I like that. I remember the first time I had to gift wrap something, I didn't even know it was an option. And I got the order and it said gift wrapping. I was like, what? I have to wrap this? But I like wrapping gifts, so it was fine.
Yeah.
Are there any tools that you are using to run your business? Not just Etsy, but even off of Etsy, any tools or resources or books that you found particularly helpful that you think might be beneficial to others?
Yeah. I think some of my favorites are, first of all, you mentioned it earlier, but eRank is a absolute, gem of a tool and resource. And make sure too that you join the Facebook group, because Anthony Wolf is in there himself, like all the time, just giving this like invaluable advice, and it's just a really good resource to have. And it's free you can join it for free. There is a paid service, but you can use it for free as well. And then something that I use for one of my favorite tools for my photos, it's called a color story, and you can get that in the App Store. And it's just a really simple tool that I use to brighten up my photos, and it works really well, especially for photos that have white backgrounds. But a color story, that's one of my favorite apps, and it's really simple to use.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's great. I'll link to that. I was just writing that down, so I make sure I go look it up so I can include the link to it in the show notes for this episode. But since it's a smartphone app, I guess anyone can go to either the App Store or the Google Play Store, I believe are the two, and look it up. And it's a color story, right?
And there's a filter in there called Pop. That's the filter that I use. And it just pops your photo. It's really cool.
Nice. And I'm glad you mentioned the Facebook group for eRank, and that Anthony is in there. I love that he's so hands-on, and he's very helpful. And I haven't been in the group in a while, but I'm in there, and I've just seen the conversations that go on, and just how helpful he is to people when they ask questions and all whatnot. And it's a great tool. So I'm with you on that all the way. Now, Traci, if anyone wants to get in touch with you or connect with you after this, what's the best way they can do that?
Well, if they want to just contact me directly on my website, I have a contact form which has my email. But if you're
that's the vintagepreneuruniversity.com website.
Right. And there's a contact tab in there where it has my email. You could reach out to me directly but if you're just looking to get my trainings, then either one of those trainings will get you kind of in touch with me and in the loop of things to come.
Nice. So I will link to those. I'll also have a link to Traci's Etsy shop, Rustic Eye, so folks can check you out there as well. And these will all be in the show notes for this episode. Traci, before I let you go, what's one piece of advice you'd give to someone who is not yet selling on Etsy, but they're considering it because they either want an additional source of income, and but they're held back because there's a hesitation about starting a business or starting something on the side. What would you say to that person who's still sitting on the fence?
I mean, I think the simplest thing is just to do it, because it's really easy to get started on Etsy. There's literally, a 20-cent risk, and probably your biggest roadblock, like I mentioned earlier, is kind of yourself. And if you can get out of your own way and just start, everybody starts at the beginning. So you're going to learn as you go, and don't be afraid to make mistakes like we talked about, and just, keep going. Cause really you just have to have the mindset that I'm going to do this. I'm going to make it work. I'm going to keep going. And I think that's the most important thing that you can do overall.
Yes. Thank you for that, Traci. I appreciate you sharing that. And I appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast and share the information you have. Thank you for what you're doing for the vintage sellers in the Etsy community. I know I appreciate that. And I know others who are looking for more resources for vintage sellers, especially from successful vintage sellers, will appreciate that as well. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. I've had so much fun.
You're welcome. And I thank you for listening to the podcast. I will be back next time.
Thank you for listening. You can subscribe to the podcast in iTunes, and while you're there, please leave a review too. Visit convome.com to leave a comment or feedback on this episode.